So what's the little turny knob thing all about?
Excuse me?
Ask the Hosts, episode 1. I'm Joe.
I'm Gary.
And I'm Alan.
Hello, chaps. It's a brand new show for the Late Night Linux family. And we're going to have various hosts from the Late Night Linux family shows on each episode. But for this first one, it's just you two. As the name suggests, we're going to be answering your questions, dear listener. You can send them in to us via email, show@askthehosts.com, and you can ask us anything you want with one caveat. We can't talk about Linux or free and open source software, but anything else is fair game. And if you're listening on Patreon, then you're getting this early. And if you're not on Patreon, then you could have been listening to this 2 weeks ago. So go to askthehost.com/support and you'll find the Patreon link. We'll probably do this about once a month, but we'll see. So the first question. Saya asks, what's the most beautiful place you've ever visited?
For me, probably Montenegro. My wife booked a holiday to Montenegro for a belated honeymoon, and neither of us really had any idea what to expect. We just sort of booked somewhere that was cheap. And when the plane was landing, we just both looked out the window and, going through this really mountainous terrain that was just nothing for miles and miles. And we spent the week there, and I've got to say, it's just picturesque. We spent the entire time kind of by the beach, kind of going up and down mountains, ended up in this really amazing restaurant that was sort of nestled in the mountains, and the restaurant owner caught the fish for you to eat. And it was just a really, really lovely week away. And there wasn't a single thing I looked at and thought, that's not particularly great.
I feel terrible that I couldn't point to Montenegro on a map.
Well, I know that it's near Serbia.
Yeah, so think of Italy on the map and then go east across the sea. So it's sort of in the Balkans, slightly below Croatia.
I think the most beautiful place I've ever been is either Sicily, just because of the mountains and the arid nature of it. And this was in January when no one was around. There was no tourists there. And it was just really weird. I went up on this mountain where if you look on Street View, there's a massive car park and it's just rammed because it must be in summer and there's an ice cream van and everything. And then I've got a photo of just my little hire car there, no one else. And so there's a real stark beauty of Sicily in January. And it wasn't too cold either. It was like London in sort of late March, early April. So not exactly warm, but not horribly freezing. But either that or the Pacific Northwest around kind of Seattle and stuff, all of the woods around there, not really the cities, but just, you just go a tiny bit outside and you've just got so many. I'd never seen so many trees in all my life when I went there.
Yeah, I've got to say, I've got memories of hiring a car when I went out to Linux Fest Northwest, and someone in the B&B I was staying in suggested I drove out to Leavenworth, which is a tiny town that's modelled after a kind of historic German village, about 100 miles away from Seattle. And just driving up through the mountains and forests to get there was, like you say, just really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I was overwhelmed by the size and quantity of trees up in that part of the world. I think I was there the same time as you, Joe. And it was quite good fun driving long journeys through trees, trying to keep up with other Linux nerds in their hire cars.
I also like London. I know people don't think it's very beautiful and it's a bit sort of grim and grimy and dirty, but I don't know, there's something beautiful about the really old buildings mixed with the new ones. I suppose you get that in a lot of cities, really, but like you go to the city of London and you've got pubs that are like 1,000 years old nearly next to these giant skyscrapers, and I just love that juxtaposition somehow.
Yeah, for me, there's nothing nicer than on like a warm summer's morning, having a walk along the South Bank. I usually deliberately stay quite away from our office when I'm working in London, and just nice stroll along the South Bank in the morning, soaking in the sun, walking along with a coffee is, like you say, it's something nice about it.
Yeah, really nice 3 days a year when it's sunny.
Yeah, indeed.
Keeping the honeymoon theme, my most beautiful place, I think, would be the Maldives, where Claire and I went on our honeymoon. And we stayed on this little island that took, about 10 minutes to walk from one end to the other and 30 seconds to walk from one side to the other. It was really small, mostly beach with a few buildings, but it was really quiet other than, all the other honeymooners there. And I had an opportunity to do scuba diving And scuba diving in the coral in the Maldives is just amazing, because as you get to the edge of the atoll, the surface of the ground under the water, the bed of the sea, whatever the word that is, just drops off in front of you. And it's quite scary and quite awe-inspiring and makes you realize just how tiny you are. But on the land, it's just like a desert island with a few buildings plopped on it and some really nice chefs who cook up good food and a bar and, you know, a pool and all that kind of stuff. It's like a well-appointed desert island. It's absolutely lovely and completely disconnected. When we were there 20 years ago, you could barely make a phone call and there was no cell reception. It was really nice. It was lovely.
All right, Simon asks, what's the weirdest coincidence that's ever happened to you?
So I think for me, it was the aforementioned trip to Linux Fest Northwest, where just sort of quietly booked it, turned up, and suddenly there's tons of people you recognize in the car park. And I think I remember turning up and bumping into you and Wimpy Popey, and it was just this like, I've seen you somewhere before. What the hell are you doing here? Obviously, I should have probably put two and two together and realized that actually, we all have a very common interest. We're all part of the same community and should be in the same place. But I just didn't think of it. And it was just this weird coincidence of standing in a car park outside Seattle, eating barbecue with a load of people that historically I'd been drinking with in a pub in Manchester not that long before.
Yeah, that was super weird. And also putting faces to names of people I only know via like online Twitter handles or IRC nicknames, and they tell me who they are. And I'm like, oh, you. Oh, okay. Yes, I get it now. Yeah.
Yeah, those situations are always really bizarre, but I think they're even weirder when it's another random place on the other side of the world and you suddenly bump into someone. I had a similar experience where I met a guy who actually lives about 6 miles away from me. We had no idea each other existed, met at an old camp and like, where are you from? And we both said where we were from. And it was that conversation of, are you really from there or are you from town outside of there? And turns out we live about 6 miles away from each other. Never knew, had bumped into each other a ton of times at various events. And now we meet up fairly regularly.
Well, my weirdest coincidence is not a very big coincidence, but it is weird. So once upon a time, I decided I was going to do stand-up comedy because I thought I was funny. And that didn't really work out. But as part of that, I had to, I was advised to make a lot of friends on Facebook and do some networking with other people who were in the comedy scene, because that's how you got on and got gigs and stuff. And so I friended loads of people and then got into podcasting instead of stand-up and lost interest in it. And slowly but surely unfriended people as they annoyed me. But then I've stayed friends with people who I find funny and interesting. And it's a little bit parasocial. Well, it's a lot parasocial because they don't know me and I never post anything. I occasionally reply snarky things when I'm drunk or whatever, but I never post anything about my life. So I feel like I know a few people on there. And one time near the tube station where I live, there's a little supermarket there. And I was going in there one evening and I saw one of these people who I'm friends with, in quotes, on Facebook. And I was like, oh, your person's name. And they were like, yeah. And I had to suddenly oh no, I now have to explain this whole story of how I know who you are and you don't know who I am. And oh yeah, I'm really good with faces or something. And that was a coincidence that was weird, but it was weird because it was weird of me to have this parasocial relationship with this person.
So I've had a few of those more recently with, having been a kind of public figure in open source for Ubuntu. And so there's naturally, places I go and people recognize me. But actually I think the first occasion when this happened was in 1995. And I was in Ibiza on a lad's holiday. And I think I can top your 6 miles away story with, I was standing waiting for a friend to go and get changed before we went into a nightclub. So I'm standing there. It's quite late at night. It's dark. And this guy comes up to me and he says, you're Alan, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I think so. Yeah. And he said, yeah, I live in your road at home. And I was like, well, that's weird. And he told me which house he lived in. He lived down the end of this cul-de-sac and we lived near the entrance of the cul-de-sac. This is when I lived at home with my mum, right? And at the time, I had a nice car because I got a new job and I got a company car and it was a Mercedes. And he kind of said, yeah, I live in your road. We know you. We've all seen you in your Mercedes. And I'm thinking, oh God, I feel really terrible. Poncing around in this nice car in a, pretty average neighborhood. And I was like, it wasn't mine. It's a company car. It's not mine. But it was really weird to have some guy who lives in the very road I live in. I guess you could argue that it's just a holiday destination and that could happen to anyone because the whole of the UK goes to Ibiza, or at least it did back then.
Well, yeah, I remember must have been the late 80s when I was a little kid and we were in Florida on a family holiday and I bumped into someone from my school in Disney World, I think, which when you think about it isn't that weird, but it felt pretty weird at the time.
Yeah, I think I've had those situations as well where I've gone on a family holiday as a kid and then you've got up on the plane to go to the loo and you've seen someone from like your class because you're walking down the back of the plane and you just spend the entire thing like, oh, please don't be in the same hotel as me.
I think the more recent weird one was when someone recognized me through my voice on a train in Germany. I was heading home from a canonical internal sprint and I was chatting to my boss at the time, just stood up in a corridor on a train in Germany on the way to the airport. And while we were chatting away, having a beer, this guy walked past us and just stopped and said, "Popey." And I went, "Yes." And he said, "I listened to your podcast. Hold on to these." And he handed us his beers and then reached in his pocket and pulled out an Ubuntu phone. He goes, "Look, the Ubuntu phone, it's here in Germany." And I was like, okay, hello. It was really weird. And my boss thought it was very strange that someone would recognize me just from my voice because he heard it as he walked past us. It was very weird.
Okay, Jean asks, what are your fondest memories of just completely disconnecting from any electronics for a while?
I had a holiday with Claire a few years ago. We went down to Cornwall and stayed in a place called St. Berrien. And we stayed on a farm where they've got a converted barn that's been turned into like a holiday let. And, we drove actually onto the farm, bumpy road, potholed road, and we get to the barn and it was delightful. But there was absolutely no signal there. And we spent most of our time lighting a little wood fire, sitting out in the garden, going for walks, had a walk down to the beach. But we really didn't use any electronic devices at all. I think the FM radio in the barn was about as technologically advanced as it gets, and even that didn't work very well.
Yeah, I pretty regularly have a similar experience. So we've got family in Northern Ireland and we pretty regularly holiday in a rural seaside town in Northern Ireland, at least once a quarter, I would say. And the most technological thing there is where the undersea fibre goes from the Isle of Man to Ireland. But despite that, there is absolutely no cell connectivity, no internet connectivity. And the only things in this village are a scout hut, a pub, and some ex-British Army billets that have been converted into holiday homes. So literally nothing else there. So the first time I went there was the first time I was meeting my now wife's dad. And it was a little bit of a shock to the system. But I think disconnecting from the world for a week due to there being no cell service and everything else actually was a really nice opportunity to bond with him over many, many pints of Guinness. And just enjoy kind of being disconnected and taking in the surroundings and kind of going for walks around kind of abandoned army base and the seaside and everything else. And really, really fond memories there. End up having to do it about every 3 months now. And whilst the novelty sometimes wears off and I try and find the exact spot on the fireplace to put my phone to get enough connectivity to stream something on Netflix, actually broadly being disconnected from the world, knowing that no one can contact me and actually realizing that nothing bad is going to happen if I can't check my messages until 8 p.m. in the evening when I have to walk up onto the bankhead and suddenly get a glimmer of edge on my device is actually really nice, because I think that at home probably become a little bit of a slave to my phone, carry it around in my pocket all the time, make sure that I can always get notifications just in case something bad might happen.
I'm getting physically anxious listening to this, man. I could not have a good time not being connected. And I get that some people say, oh, that's terrible. But like, that's just the modern world, man. I like the fact that we're all connected. I like that I can talk to anyone at any time and anyone can talk to me. I mean, I have my phone on silent. I have it on my terms. And sometimes I might go a few hours without looking at it. But that's on my terms. I'm not somewhere where if I did look at my phone, there'd be no connection. That gives me anxiety to not have the ability to have any connection.
So I think the most recent occurrence where I was disconnected was last week on a canal boat trip with a bunch of friends. There's 7 of us rented a canal boat from a place called Napton. And we went south on the Oxford Canal towards Banbury and then turned around and went back. It was only 4 days or so on the boat. We all had our phones with us in our pockets, although a couple of people just left it on charge in the canal boat and just didn't look at it at all. But they're less connected people than you or I, Joe. I spent a lot of the time standing at the back of the boat, not navigating, like holding onto the tiller and making sure I didn't steer into the side of the canal. And so I couldn't use my phone a lot. I'd look at it now and then and take a few photos. And when someone else took a turn, or we went to the pub, I might use my phone. But during the day, I spent more time talking to my friends, some of which I haven't seen for a very long time. And it was more in the moment. And I know people give all these cliche, touch grass and, live in the moment, don't live through the screen. But it's really true. Like, the reception was terrible, even right in the middle of the UK, near Oxford and Banbury. You'd think they'd be able to get a cell signal to a canal, but turns out no. It was a zone of no connectivity, but it was fine because there was half a dozen other people I could talk to and chat about family stuff and what they've been up to, and it was lovely. It was really, really nice.
You're making it worse telling me there's half a dozen other people there now.
I think I find for me that the nervous twitch of, where's my phone? Or, have I got any notifications? Goes away after a couple of days. The first couple of days, I find myself constantly going over to the phone and tapping the lock button and seeing if there's anything on the screen. And after a couple of days, it just disappears. And I just enjoy spending time either with the people I'm with or alone. Like, the last time I was there, took myself off for, 4 or 5 mile walk across the beach to the next village and really enjoyed it. And actually it was a bit of a change to go for a walk and not listen to any podcasts or anything like that. And I did feel, don't you say, Popey, it's a little bit cliche, but it did feel a bit more in touch with what was around me, despite the fact that there wasn't really anyone or anything around me other than some rocks. But I think, that fear of being disconnected is something that, for me, I certainly find healthy to go and combat head to head every now and again.
No, that's what people say about spiders, but I'm not having that either. I'm not having them crawling on me, and I'm not going anywhere with no connection, quite frankly.
Well, good news. On the canal boat, there were loads of spiders and no connectivity, so I had the best of both worlds.
Oh, and loads of people as well. Oh,
yeah.
All right, Rev Carroll asks, if you had to choose a board game to play against each other, what would it be? One-on-one games are allowed. You don't all have to play at once. The answer is Monopoly, because Monopoly is just a more complicated snakes and ladders. You just buy everything you land on, and then it's just snakes and ladders.
I've only recently been really getting into board games, and that's because at the previous place I worked, we had some time on a Friday, which we called team time. And the whole of my team would get together on a Zoom call and we'd play board games and just chat about what we're going to do on the weekend. And it was, for a company that's 100% remote, I think it was valuable for us to have a bit of social time. So we'd spend like an hour or so, maybe an hour and a half, just shooting the breeze, unwinding before the weekend, and we play some board games. And I got introduced to way more board games doing that via boardgamearena.com. And I'm now a signed up paid user of that service so that I can play online games. And the game that I really want to play with someone else is called Azul. And it's a thing where you try and collect these little ceramic counters and arrange them in certain patterns, and then you win points for however many you've got in a pattern. It's really easy to learn, and you can play, I think, up to 5 players or something. Now, I've never actually played it in person. I've only played it online. The rendition of it on the website shows these little ceramic counters that look like the kind of tiles you have on a wall in a swimming pool, or like Roman patterns that are made in the floor. It's that kind of ceramic, and they look like they feel really great. I'm probably going to be super disappointed if I ever play with this in person, but they look great on the screen. And so I'd love to play that with someone. I don't care who, I don't care where or when, but I want to play it in person with someone with real ceramic tiles.
For me, the answer is even simpler than either of yours. It's Jenga, because I cannot deal with the stress and arguments that board games cause. Like, in my childhood, my only memories of playing board games are people screaming at each other during Monopoly, or the one person failing to understand the rules. And with Jenga, can't really get much more simple than knocking a block out of the middle of a tower. And if you knock it over, you lose. It's simple. You can play it with more than 2 people because you just do rounds. And it's relatively low stress until one of the blocks gets stuck under a sofa or something.
I put it to you that people do argue about the rules. Oh, he used 2 hands. You can't touch with another hand. You touch that one. You can't touch another one now. You've touched that. That kind of thing.
See, there's just endless arguments with any board game. I just don't want the stress. And Jenga, I find, with the people I play it with, low stress. But like you say, Popey, anyone can cause an argument about any board game.
You should totally play online using Board Game Arena and Zoom, because when you get stressed, you just close the Zoom window and you're done.
Just rage quit.
Yes, that's my policy, rage quit.